The next thing we want to do is start getting some folks who are actually helping brands execute, implement, and develop these programs. So Liz Bullock, who is a good friend of mine from Austin, Texas, is going to talk to you guys a little bit about using training for performance management and risk management as well. And Liz has some fantastic experience from doing these kinds of programs at Dell, I'm sure you guys have all heard of, and now is running a company called Social Arts and Science Institute based in Austin, which is helping companies now leverage a lot of lessons that she's learned. So she's got a lot of great things to share with you guys. So is that
this should be working, right?
Awesome.
Can you guys hear me? Yay! All right, Chris, thank you for the introduction. So I am Liz Bullock. I was formerly at Dell for almost 12 years, and with Amy Tennyson, who's in the back, we launched what is called SMAC University. So it's Social Media Community University. We went out and trained 10,000 employees on how to use social on behalf of Dell. About a year and a half ago, I left and have been working with another Dell colleague to help other organizations figure out how they train and activate their employees. So you can follow me on Liz B. Bullock. Make sure you use both B's. There is another one that is just Liz Bullock. She definitely needs training. You'll get some very exciting, interesting tweets, but that is not me. So just want to make sure you guys are clear on that. So I wanted to start off and really talk about kind of the challenge of social media training. So I mentioned I was at Dell for almost 12 years, did a ton of training at Dell, and what I found was that training's either in two camps. It's either compliance training, it's do not do this, or it's more thought leadership training. We want to change this behavior. We want to make you guys great leaders. We want you to do something fundamentally different. And social media training is both. And I use this kind of lame analogy with this kind of candle. So this was years ago. I was doing a compliance training course, and I'm sure you guys have seen all these different training courses where they'll say, hey, if you see the spill on the floor, don't step in the puddle. You know, if you're going to lift a box, use your knees. And I remember one of these training courses was don't leave a candle burning on your desk. And I was like, are you serious? Like, hello? You know, like, yes, of course, I'm not going to leave a candle burning on the desk. But it made me think someone did that and did not have good results with that, and therefore it was in the training. And I started thinking about it, and social media is like that in the sense that we've got to protect folks from putting a candle on their desk, but at the same time, candles can be very powerful. Light can give you visibility, you can see things. It can give you warmth, it's got a lot of benefits to it. So this is kind of the challenge of social media training. It's the don't put the candle on the desk because we don't want to burn down the building. At the same token, there's a lot of power to it as well. So training really needs to balance both risk mitigation as well as scaling engagement. I'm not going to go through any stories on the risks piece. I think we see these every single day. Unfortunately, an employee goes out there and makes a misstep, and you see the brand implications from that. I think what's interesting that I've been seeing as I'm working with a lot of clients these days is that policies, you know, up until recently have been thou shalt not. Do not do this, do not do this, do not do this. And what I'm seeing now is a company we're working with right now, they're like, we don't know what to do because for so long we told our employees, do not do anything. And now we want them to do something differently, and they're terrified. It's a cultural change now. And so it is so critical as you're thinking about your training program. Yes, there's a risk piece to it, but then there's this huge other piece. You know, we heard from these brand ambassadors, but there's social business, social selling, customer support. How are we using social to recruit the best talent out there? There's so many opportunities. So how do you balance that? So it really is a balancing act. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys 10 steps to think about as you're thinking about your training. So, I think first and foremost, is your organization ready? So a couple years back, if you were just looking from a risk perspective, then I would say, make sure you have the right policy in place and make sure you have the right training in place. But I think now that we're talking about activating brand ambassadors and fundamentally changing the role of the employee, there's so many things that go beyond that. Yes, you need to have a current social media policy that is friendly and relevant and probably look at it every single year and make changes. Yes, you need to do training, but there's also components to metrics and measurement. What are the business objectives that you're trying to accomplish? What are the behaviors? What are the outcomes that you want? What's the technology that you're using to activate employees? And then leadership. Your executive leadership is critical to this change in behavior. This is a cultural change. This is a new way that employees are being activated and engaged, and they're going to be looking to their leadership team to get that nod and to make those changes. So step number 1, is your organization ready? Step number 2, what are your business objectives? What are you trying to accomplish? You know, we talk about risk. Yes, first and foremost, let's protect our brand and our employees. That's kind of one piece of it. But then what are all the different ways that you want to activate folks? Is this about your sales organization and doing social selling and lead gen? Is this customer service, meeting your customers out there as they're having inquiries and need help? What are those business objectives? And everything that you should do as you think about your training should ladder up to those business objectives. But these are examples. Do not hold your business objectives up to these. They're just going to give you some thoughts. Step number 3, get your employees to understand, it's underlined, understand a 2-page legal document. When I was at Dell, we had another team working on our social media policy. It was a revamp a few years back. It took us 6 months to get this policy updated. And once we had it and we thought it was beautiful, we're like, okay, great, but the reality is your employees are not going to read it. As beautiful as it is, as much work as you've put into it, no one's going to consume it. And I think that your policy is at the foundation of the risk piece and how you're activating employees. And so you've got to get creative and think through how you can get employees to understand this 2-page or 3-page legal document. From a Dell perspective, we did 5 overarching principles. Amy and I got in a conference room for a full day with another colleague and came up with these are the 5 overarching principles that employees need to follow. I've seen other organizations, Coca-Cola, Adobe, do this as well. I think that there's numerous ways that you can communicate this out. We see a ton of different videos. 3M has done this. You've also got to teach your employees judgment. You know, as much as this policy is great, not everything is black and white. And I think there's a lens that they need to understand on the ramifications of what could happen. I think you need to show employees examples of what good and bad looks like. Yes, there's some major boo-boos out there. That is a technical term. But there's a lot of good stuff out there as well. And show them what that good looks like. Kind of separate side note on this, we've been working with a brand on their training program. And the first class that we had a lot of judgment exercises. So it gave a lot of boo-boos in there. And we got feedback from the attendees, and they said, there's too many boo-boos in here. Like, it makes me nervous to do anything on social. So you need to show them what good looks like as well. I'm a huge fan on the personal branding piece. How can you include personal branding and make this a benefit for your employees? End of the day, if you're launching a brand ambassador program, whatever it may be, this will benefit them and you hugely. Integrate into other corporate training compliance courses. So all organizations have them. I know you've got them somewhere. Figure out how you can integrate your social media policy into that existing requirements. And then last but not least, any way that you can to utilize executives to share this message. They just carry a lot more weight is the reality. So how can you get them to talk about the policy and the rules? So step number 4, once you've gone through and identified your business objectives, you're going to have to really go through and define and prioritize your target audience that you're going to train. Altimeter did a report, I think it's about 1.5 years ago, talking through how different organizations were breaking down audiences from a training perspective. And I really think that this is a solid model in regards to thinking about all employees. What do all employees need to know? Social media practitioners, what do they need to know? Executives, what do they need to know? And then maybe looking at different organizations, whether it's sales, if it's social selling, what do they need to know? Or if you're doing a subject matter expert program, what do they need to know? I think the other thing is really prioritizing your target audience and thinking through who you're going to roll out to first. From a Dell perspective, we rolled out to social media practitioners and all employees first, and I'm glad we did, because we had a couple things that we needed to kind of work through before it went to executives. But executives was a big linchpin for us, and we had to get to them quickly to make sure they understood the business value and could make sure they gave their teams the thumbs up to go and be active from a social perspective. So you really kind of have to think through that target audience and how you roadmap out whom and when you train. And I think, I'd love to say you can just train everyone all at once on everything. The reality is, I don't think you can. I think that executives have a very different mindset on this stuff, unfortunately, and I think it's a very different conversation than your everyday employee and social media practitioner. Step number 5. So really fast, how many of you guys have written creative briefs or marketing briefs before? Awesome. So I don't know if you guys remember, there's this one kind of line in your creative brief, and it would always say, what do we want our customers to think, feel, or do? Do you guys remember this? So as you're thinking about your training program, I think you have to do the same thing for your employees. What do we want our employees to think about social media? What do we want them to feel about social media? And what do we want them to do about social media? End of the day, do we want them to think that social media is exciting, that it's powerful? Do we want them to feel okay doing it, comfortable? I can do this for my brand. And then what do we want them to do? Do we want them out there building their brands, doing social selling, or whatever it may be? So we've worked with clients before, and actually we've had folks actually do this exercise where we actually write it down on a piece of paper and we'll brainstorm and have everyone kind of think through what, from an employee perspective, what I want to do. If you go back to the previous target audience, you can do that same exercise and break it out for your different audiences as well. Just a fun little exercise, and everyone's got free time, right? Step number 6, as you're thinking about your training content, everything's got to build and ladder. So training content should ladder from risk to specific activation. So what you're seeing here, this is an example of maybe how you would approach executives. First and foremost, the policy. Let's ground everyone there. We're good. But then for executives, maybe it's the power of social media and the business benefits. How are we going to get their attention and make sure this is really relevant to the business and has power and can be game-changing? Next piece, maybe how to effectively manage and lead social teams. For the first time ever, these executives are in a place where they don't know something as well as people below them do. So how do you coach them to have the right conversations with their teams, to ask the right questions, and to effectively lead and manage them? And then maybe the next step is how to build a personal social brand. Once again, this is all depending on what you want these teams to do. The point is, how can you have the training content ladder up and build off what you need and what you want to ultimately get them to do? Step number 7, resource planning. So, the reality is, and we see this with a lot of our clients today, once you start building out your training program, there's just a lot from a resource planning perspective that you've got to go through. Is this training content going to be housed in-house? Are you using external partners? Who's going to manage this training content going forward? What's the format? Is it in person? Is it online? I think also different audiences require different needs. Do you provide assessments, certifications? So I'm not going to answer all of these today. I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But there is a reality you need to do this work. And I would say, one of the biggest benefits for us was in really working with our learning and development team and understanding all the best practices around learning and development and what works within your organization. So go buy them coffee. Step number 8. I hear from a lot of organizations that are doing training. They're doing it within the social media center of excellence team or for a social media team in general. And I think that you've got to also think through what's happening within your current organization and how can you integrate the training into what's happening within your organization. So onboarding, we all go through it. Everyone goes through probably a day or 2 days of training. How is your ambassador program integrated into onboarding? How is the training integrated into onboarding? It may not be a full-fledged training, but at least mentioning it and getting those new employees part of the training program. Maybe it's a job responsibility. We did this at Dell where we basically said there were certain employees, if you're doing this on behalf of Dell, you have to go through these training classes. So how can you make it a requirement? Obviously training, how can you integrate into the corporate training? How are you working with the communications team to make sure employees are aware of this? What's happening in quarterly all hands? Performance plans. Can you make this part of performance plans? I do think that we're going to see a huge shift in the next year or so where I think it is going to be something where this is a requirement. You know, we're already seeing this with financial institutions where they're having to make this a requirement for their employees. Reviews. You know, how is this part of your performance plan and your reviews? And then last but not least, awards. I can tell you, I tried so hard when I was at Dell to get formal awards or the social media awards into the formal awards. It didn't quite ever work. I could never quite get it in there. So we just made up our own awards. And we would pass out YouTube socks and coffee mugs and, you know, silly stuff. And so I think there's, if you can't get it into the current processes, there's still ways that you can be creative and celebrate those rock stars that are leading the way. Okay, I know this is an eyeful. I will walk you through this. So step number 9, from a metrics perspective, you do need to think about those KPIs. And I've got this in 3 buckets: awareness, adoption, and results. So you really need to determine your KPIs through awareness, adoption, and results. Awareness is, our employees, do they know about the training? Are they participating in the training? Are you getting the right organizations to come to your classes? What's the class fill rate? What's the total attended? Is there a survey where people are giving you feedback? Just awareness in general. Are we getting the adoption and the results that we want? Next phase is adoption. And once again, this goes back to how you're activating folks. Maybe it's a total brand ambassador count. Maybe it's the number of social handle requests. Maybe it's a decrease in rogue social accounts. It depends on what you guys are trying to accomplish, but you have to be thinking about that adoption. And then third, are you actually getting those business results? Are you getting an increase in traffic to the website? Are you getting, earned media value, improved share of voice, SEO, whatever those ultimate business objectives that you were trying to accomplish? Yes, you will be able to measure, but it's going through phases of awareness, adoption, and results. All right, and step number 10, last but not least, I think that as you're building out your training program, I'm a huge fan of piloting. We did this at Dell. We're doing this with other clients now, where we basically will bring together employees, and it can be a mix. It doesn't have to be your most socially active employees, but we'll basically go out and present the training and say, okay, what works? What doesn't? Where could we make changes? And I've got to say, not only have we gotten tremendous feedback, but the employees that have participated in that pilot program feel like they're part of something. And so when you're trying to drive awareness of your program, they're out there, the forefront going, everyone's got to take this training. It's amazing. You guys got to go do it. I do think that starting with socially active peeps, yes, another technical term, is very powerful. I think there's some great tools out there if you need to try and figure out whom are your social active peeps. There's sociallook.net. Horatio's right there. And so they do a great report on helping to identify employees as they have the company in their Twitter bio. There's also Follower Wonk, which also helps identify employees as well. And you can get some really good statistics on the socially active peeps. But I think as you're doing your program, how can you bring them into the fold and get feedback on your training program? All right, so to recap, Number one, is your organization ready? Have you identified your business objectives? Can you get your employees to understand a 2-page legal document? How are you defining and prioritizing your target audience? Are you identifying what you want your target audience to think, feel, and do? Training content should ladder from risk to specific activation. The old exciting resource planning, grab a bottle of wine. Integrate into your current processes, where's that opportunity? Determine your specific KPIs through awareness, adoption, and results. And then last but not least, pilot with your most socially active peeps. So I wanted to end on a quote, since this is training perspective. The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires. Our employees are going through a fundamental change in how they represent the company. I think you guys have a great opportunity to build training programs that inspire them. Obviously, we want to protect them, but how are we inspiring them to do things differently, to build relationships they've never built before, and to play this whole new role for your company? All right.
Am I on? I'm on. Questions for Liz? Here we go. We got one. Hello, Kevin Hunt.
And hi, Liz.
Hi, Kevin.
Kevin Hunt from General Mills. I'm curious, your point about working this into performance plans and performance reviews. I'm sure in our next session regarding legal, we might have some conversation around that too. But can you provide some examples of how that works? What does that look like when you actually put that into play to say, we are going to encourage you to advocate on behalf of the company, and what does that look like in a review setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will use an example from Dell. So Dell's North American marketing team last year, they recognized that all marketers needed to use social in some form or fashion. So they went out and they identified 5 different ways that employees should be using social. Now, one could be just listening. It could just be that you're just using their Radian6 listening tool to basically get better insights about customers. Another one could be a brand ambassador. Another one could be a community manager. Amy Heiss, what are the other 2?
Content creator
Content creator.
and employee advocate.
I thought I already said that one.
Employee advocate, content creator,
There's 4. No, just kidding. There's 5.
thought leader.
Thought leader. Thank you, thought leader. So they went out and they said, you've got to, in your performance plan, you have to play one of these roles. And there were specific actions that they had to do. If you're a listener, then you have to use the Radian6 tool. If you're a brand advocate, then you have to play this role. But they gave them the choice. And so what I liked about that, it wasn't saying everyone's got to be a brand advocate. It was you get to self-select into what makes most sense for you. And they wrote this in the performance plans. A couple things they did was Dell's got a rating system that impacts your bonus and promotions and all that. You could not get a top rating if you did not comply with this. Also, if you were trying to basically move into marketing, you had to play one of these roles in order to do so. I know it will be interesting in the next conversation to kind of hear how we do that. I do like the whole fact that they said, look, we recognize a brand ambassador, it's not for everyone, but there is power in social and there's power in listening or being a thought leader. You get to self-select, but you have to play one of these roles. The other thing I would say on what I've seen in regards to requirements is I think we see it all the time in performance plans that you have to take these training courses. Usually it's compliance, like don't put the candle on your desk. But I think we're going to see more and more organizations make where social media training is part of the performance plan. I just think that's a reality. Great question.
Anybody else? Question for Liz?
Got Susan.
Here we
there.
are. Okay.
Hi, I'm Christina Alexiadis with IHS, and this is really great information information. You mentioned early on that when you do that first rollout, let's say to the marketing peeps, and then you want all those colleagues to jump on board. How long does it typically take to roll out to the executives? Because you want to get to them quickly, but you also want to enable before there's a lot of conversation and
Yep.
they want to be involved in that. So how long does it typically take that you want to get there and be able to adapt the content that you've rolled out to the...
It's a great question. I think, it depends on your organization, unfortunately. But from a Dell perspective, and this was a big learning for us, I think it was about a year, maybe a year and a half before we rolled it out, and we were too late. Not too late, but we'd kind of missed a window in a way. So what we did was after a year, after we launched this training program, we did a survey out to employees, and we said, hey, now that you've gone through this training, what are you doing differently? What are you not doing differently? What do you need? And we got this huge wave of feedback saying, my manager does not support this. And what was interesting for us was that we had Michael Dell, at the top, who is one of the most active, very influential, got us into the space, CEO, but we had this middle management layer that didn't understand it. So we had created this groundswell where employees were so excited. They were going to their management team going, oh my gosh, I took this training. I'm super excited to play this role. And the management team didn't, they were like, wait a second, like you're gonna go tweet about what you ate for breakfast? Like, I don't think so. Like, stay off, I need you on calls sort of thing. So, I think for us, if we could have done it sooner, it would have been better. I also think that, there's keys to when it's getting rolled out. How are you messaging to the executives that this is being rolled out? Are there things that you can do before you do a more formal training for them to kind of prep them? I think there's, Amy Heiss now runs the Dell SmackU program, and there's something also interesting that they're doing now where when a person goes through training, their manager gets notified that's saying like, hey, it's an email that goes over and says, hey, so-and-so went through training. Here's some questions to ask them about the training class. And so it's also allowing now for a dialogue to happen. So I think there's also some interesting tactics there. But, I don't have a specific timing. I just think as soon as you can, get to them.
Any other questions for Liz? We got one here. Okay.
Thanks. It's a little broader than the training piece, but really when you have already socially active brand advocates who are creating their own personal brands, and then you want them to help you with piloting the program, that sort of thing, do you try to bring them into the company's branded presence, or do they keep their own sort of personal brand, their own Twitter handles, their own blogs, et cetera, and you're sort of promoting that, or is there sort of a transition? How does...
It's a great question. We handled it where it was kind of one-off conversations, but lots of times we let them keep their own personal brand. They had it before they had come to the company. They had invested a lot of time, and it made a lot of sense. What we really tried to do was make sure they felt part of the Dell fold and part of the training and part of this larger program. They were also great partners for us to work with because they had been doing this stuff way beyond the fact that we had. When I first got this role to do training, Dell had been in the space since 2006. I came in 2010, so there were folks that had been doing this for years, and I'm like, seriously, I'm supposed to go train that person who knows so much, like they should be training me. So it was a real trick to kind of figure out how do we get them strategically aligned, but lots of times we let them, sometimes they wanted to move to the Dell brand, but we had that conversation with them to let them make that choice.
Okay, Bobby's got a question.
Liz, I was wondering if you could just talk about, obviously a lot of your experience comes from Dell, but there was a lot of hands in the air that were from like non-tech brands in your experience with Sassy. Like, can you talk about what are some of the differences between tech and like retail or CPG that you've seen?
Great question. I have found that the non-technology brands, they have more cultural challenges than what I've been seeing with some of the other technology brands, that there is a bigger disconnect with employees wanting to change understanding the business value of social. There's a lot more that we've had to do in the education piece. One client in particular, before we launched the training, we actually did a survey because we needed to understand the landscape. And it was so eye-opening to see just the perspective on social that you don't see. Technology companies tend to kind of just get it more, where a lot of these folks need a lot more kind of hand-holding, and their executives need a lot more focus as well.
Okay, we've got another question.
Thank you. Patty Fletcher, IHS. We're a non-technology company, and I come from tech, so it's a little difficult.
Did you relate with what I was saying?
I did, yeah, right on, sister. So just wondering, what was the tipping point for the non-tech exec? What, in your education of them, did you find that they were like, I get it?
To me, it's teaching them the business value. When we were at Dell and we were doing executive training, we were able to do the business value, but we were able to go, look, inside of Dell, here's all the business value that we've accumulated, where for these other brands, they haven't necessarily done it, so they don't have the business value. So it's showing externally that business value and how other companies have done it. I will also say bringing in someone from the outside helps. As much as your opinion matters, lots of times you don't, just the reality, you don't get heard. And so I think it is bringing in thought leaders, people that have done it, people that have worked at brands that have made this successful. That's kind of the big, I think, aha for them. So.
Got time for one more, Andrew, who I haven't met yet, but I met online. Andrew, good to see you.
Maybe before I ask my question, can I ask a question of the audience? How many people in the room are from a marketing organization? Oh, not as many as I thought. How about operations or HR? I don't know what the rest of you are doing. I sometimes worry that when we come into these programs as marketers, we're instantly screwed. And I've found that when I'm working with clients, if I can find somebody inside, say, operations or HR, and come in with a business case such as, I have a program that's going to help us on call deflection, and that's our KPI, where everybody already knows what the number is about that.
Yep.
Or employee retention, which everybody knows what it costs to onboard a new employee versus, so using these old-fashioned great metrics to say I've got a new way of doing that seems to get a lot better traction than coming in with my marketing hat saying we got to get everybody on social media, to which case I'm going to get a lot of resistance.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you've had success or stories where you've come in throwing the jargon away, coming in with old-fashioned KPIs and addressing it in a new way. And at the end of the day, you get broad employee advocacy programs, but you never called it that.
Right, right. So, from a Dell perspective, we did tie majority of what we did to those older metrics around cost savings. And, those key pieces, there were still some new metrics that we brought in just to the reality of what we were trying to do. But for the most part, tying to those other KPIs were very powerful for us. The challenge was that sometimes they were really hard to measure. So I'll give you an example, customer service. So when Dell started its At Dell Cares group and was going out there and actually helping customers from a customer service perspective, you couldn't show that much cost savings. We were like, hey, it's going to save all this money. We had 2 employees doing this. And so, the reality was we had to come up with some other metrics to kind of help us. And so Dell created what was called ranters to ravers, where they basically could say, here's a customer that is completely not happy with us, complaining. We engaged, and so they've gone from a ranter to now a raver of saying, I love Dell, I will forever buy Dell systems. And so we kind of had those interim metrics where we were able to kind of prove, hey, we're getting some results here. Let's hire some more than 2 folks on the customer service. Let's build to this. We eventually want to get to measuring dollar savings, but we're not quite there yet. And then over time, we are able to get to those results. And it's kind of what I was showing on the KPI slide. it is something, this is a journey when you're activating your employees. It does take time. You're not going to see these instant results. So what are the results in these different phases that you can show to your executive team to show that you're making a difference? I'm not sure that answered your question, but we can talk offline.
Great.
All
Thank you,
right.
Liz. Let's give it up for Liz.